Picture this: 15 winters behind you, wrapped in silk that weighs more than your courage, believing you're walking toward vows and blessings. Instead, the palace swallows you whole. A chamber locks from the outside, not for intimacy, but for something far colder. The women surrounding you aren't celebrating, they're cataloging. A physician lingers in the corner, pen in hand, documenting what no child should endure. They told you it was sacred. What they left out was the part where your body would become evidence, where every breath you took would be judged long after the night ended. Those months of enforced silence, they suddenly collapse into meaning. So does the look in your mother's eyes that morning, the way her fingers trembled while braiding your hair, how she turned away before you could see her break. This ceremony has nothing to do with devotion. It has everything to do with dominance. This isn't a myth pulled from crumbling scrolls. For more than 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire perfected a mechanism so surgically brutal that even its enemies would have recoiled. A process whispered about in shadowed hallways, then erased entirely from memory. The year 1623. A 15-year-old princess stands at the edge of discovering that imperial marriage wears 2 masks, one glittering with gold, music, blessings. The other hidden behind doors that never open again, performed in absolute silence, remembered only by the ones it shattered. What unfolded that night wasn't personal tragedy. It was the unspoken cost of an empire's survival, a debt every sultan's daughter was expected to pay without question. When this story touches the part of you that refuses to forget, pause and tell me where you're witnessing this from. Because some truths shouldn't be carried alone. Now let me take you back to the empire itself. From 1299 to 1922, the Ottoman realm stretched like an uncharted ocean across 3 continents. Its armies stormed the gates of Vienna, carved paths through the Arabian sands. After Constantinople fell in 1453, it rose again as Istanbul, the empire's beating core, and Topkapi Palace became its most radiant symbol. Inside those golden walls, the fate of kingdoms was negotiated. But deeper still, in corridors no ambassador ever walked, the fate of souls was decided. Behind lattice screens and endless passages, the imperial harem existed as a parallel dimension, a sealed world where over 800 women lived at the height of its power. Every gesture carried weight. Every silence carried consequence. A single misstep could mean elevation or annihilation. By 1530, when Hurrem claimed the title of Hayski Sultan, the harem stopped being a household. It became a war zone without weapons, where ambition and survival played out in whispers. Concubines, most of them Christian captives seized from Europe or bought in North African trade routes, entered the palace stripped of their pasts but clutching fragile hope. They learned music, poetry, embroidery, submission, all in service of one impossible dream: catching the Sultan's gaze. The bitter irony. These enslaved women often had more pathways to influence, even freedom, than the daughters born into the highest bloodline, because royal blood came with its own kind of cage. During what historians now call the Sultanate of Women, figures like Kursum Sultan and Turhan Hattis Sultan wielded staggering influence, guiding councils, directing wars, ruling from behind veils of custom. Their authority reshaped the empire's spine. But while these women commanded power, the princesses born into the dynasty lived under an entirely different sentence. They weren't rulers. They were collateral human clauses in diplomatic contracts, living stamps on alliances, pieces placed to secure loyalty, crush rebellion, or reward obedience among the empire's most dangerous men. And it was into this machinery that Princess Fatma Sultan entered the world in 1606. Her father, Sultan Ahmed I, her mother, Kursum, a woman capable of steering an empire from the shadows. Fatma grew up surrounded by gardens, scholars, manuscripts in Arabic and Persian. Chroniclers praised her intellect. Tutors marveled at her discipline. She studied astronomy, calligraphy, history, law. By every measure, she was extraordinary. She spoke 4 languages without hesitation. She debated learned men with confidence that unnerved them. She gazed at the night sky with a curiosity that terrified her instructors because curiosity was dangerous for a princess. And none of it mattered, because from the moment she drew breath, her life was never hers. Her destiny had already been inscribed in invisible ink. She would be given away in marriage, not for love, not by choice, not for happiness, but as a tool of power. From the instant of her birth, Fatma Sultan's future had already been written on parchments no one would ever see. She would be married not when she felt ready, not if she desired it, but when the empire demanded it. Her body would serve diplomacy. Her obedience would seal alliances. And so the decision was made. The man selected, Kara Mustafa Pasha, a commander hardened by years of war against Persia, nearly 20 years her senior. The union wasn't born from affection or even familiarity. It was forged through cold calculation. For him, marriage meant advancement, protection, proximity to the throne. For her, still a teenager, it meant becoming a living instrument of state policy, a piece moved across the imperial board. And 3 months before the ceremony, the true ordeal began. The process was called Terbi'i v. Mubarak, the so-called sacred education. Reserved exclusively for princesses, it had no equivalent anywhere else on earth. This wasn't instruction. It was conditioning, a system refined over centuries to strip royal daughters of pride and replace it with reflexive obedience. The woman assigned to oversee it was Gulnar Hatun, 60 winters old, head of the harem, veteran of more than a dozen such preparations. She had watched princesses break before. She knew exactly how long it took. Under her unrelenting supervision, Fatma was led into the dais, the bride's chamber, a room lined with Persian carpets and dark ebony panels. Nothing inside was decorative. Every object carried intent. Every angle reminded the girl of her purpose. From dawn until midday, day after day, Fatma was forced to rehearse rituals of reverence. 18 distinct forms of bowing. Each posture served a function: how to greet, how to serve, how to kneel, how to lie down, how to wait in silence for her husband's arrival. Even walking was no longer instinctive. She was drilled in the yuruyush and the sesame, steps measured to the finger's width, head lowered at precisely 30 degrees, hands never rising above the heart. Every movement erased the memory of who she had been. Every correction pushed her closer to the figure she was expected to become. But movement was only the beginning. Speech became the most merciless discipline of all. Fatma's vocabulary was reduced to just 43 approved words, expressions of gratitude, apology, submission, acceptance, nothing else. Any attempt to speak freely, any deviation in tone, any question asked out of turn was punished. Fasting, isolation in damp rooms of reflection, public humiliation before the court, her obedience was not assumed, it was tested. At regular intervals, Fatma was brought before a tribunal of women and eunuchs, presided over by her own mother, Kursum. There, her compliance was evaluated as if it were currency, measured, weighed, judged. And still, this was not the worst part. Hidden beneath the palace, in underground chambers few ever entered, preparations for the first night began. They were called Talim v. Jurdek. Exact replicas of bridal chambers had been constructed below ground. Inside them stood wax mannequins, anatomical figures commissioned from Venetian artisans, crafted with unsettling precision. Before stern instructors, Fatma was forced to rehearse gestures and acts no girl her age should have been made to understand. Every reaction was recorded in coded logs. Fear, tears, resistance. Each sign of distress condemned her to more sessions, more repetition, more conditioning. Slowly, methodically, the girl who once gazed at the stars was reduced to a compliant body. Her curiosity dismantled, her spirit disciplined into silence. She was no longer a daughter of emperors. She was an apprentice to her fate, and the training did not stop there. Beyond posture, movement, and silence came endurance. Any sign of resistance, a lifted chin, a misplaced sigh, a defiant glance brought punishment, prolonged fasting until weakness set in, repetitive exercises designed to exhaust the body, confinement in cold, airless cells. Often, these humiliations were carried out in front of the entire female court, not in private, not discreetly, publicly, as if she were a disobedient servant rather than a princess of royal blood. Alongside physical control came mental purification. Fatma was forced to memorize verses drawn from Ottoman and Persian treatises on marital obedience. Passages from Nasihat al-Muluk and Akhlaqi Mohsini filled her days, texts that praised submission, sacrifice, erasure of self as sacred virtues. She recited them aloud before concubines and eunuchs who acted as judges. The girl who once spoke of astronomy and poetry now repeated words designed to extinguish her will. Prayer, too, became a weapon. 5 times a day, at exact hours, Fatma was required to perform specially composed prayers written by the empire's ulama. These were not acts of personal faith. They were instruments of control, prayers meant to dissolve individuality and redirect devotion entirely toward her future husband. Even her body learned submission through worship. And still, the humiliations continued. Twice each week, before the entire female court, Fatma was required to serve her own father's favored concubines. She washed them, combed their hair, fed them by hand, dressed them for their nights with the Sultan. This ritual was deliberate. It was meant to crush the final remnants of pride, to teach the princess that even those who shared her father's bed stood above her. Witnesses later noted that Fatma often broke down in sobs while fastening garments on those women, her hands shaking as the court looked on in silence. 1 week before the wedding, the regimen intensified. Fatma was moved to the Gelin Kershku, the bride's pavilion, an isolated structure sealed from outside sound. There, every detail of her existence was controlled. Her meals were regulated: pomegranates, honey, almonds, goat's milk, Yemeni spices. Her baths were supervised daily, using perfumed oils infused with valerian, poppy, orange blossom. The elixirs were prepared by alchemists trained in Cordoba and Samarkand. They were designed to calm, to soften, to induce surrender. The walls of the pavilion were draped with tapestries depicting ideal wives, obedient, fertile, silent, promised heavenly rewards for their submission. Venetian mirrors were placed strategically throughout the rooms, forcing Fatma to observe herself constantly, as if her own gaze had become another form of surveillance. By then, she understood the truth. Her body no longer belonged to her. Her voice had been reduced to fragments. Even her thoughts were no longer safe. And the empire was not finished with her yet, because the day of the wedding was approaching, and what awaited her then would complete what this preparation had begun. This practice was known as muraqaba. In its original form, it was a Sufi mystical exercise, a method of inward reflection meant to discipline the mind. Inside the palace, it was transformed into something else entirely, a psychological weapon, a system designed to force the princess to surveil herself, not only her actions but her thoughts. Even her inner world was no longer safe. In that isolation, Fatma began to understand the full extent of what had been done to her. She was no longer the mistress of her own life. Her body had been trained into obedience, her voice reduced to fragments. Her thoughts reshaped into reflexes of submission. The preparation had achieved its purpose. The curious, intelligent young girl who once dreamed of the heavens had been methodically erased. And then the day arrived. March 15, 1623. From the first light of dawn, Istanbul pulsed like an overflowing heart. The streets filled with incense and music. Processions wound through the city. In Topkapi Palace, banquets were laid on gold tableware, and guests moved through halls alive with celebration. There were dances from Persia and Andalusia, songs performed by the empire's finest musicians. Janissaries competed before the Sultan, displaying strength and discipline. To the people, it looked like a festival worthy of heaven itself. For Fatma, it was a sentence being carried out. Chroniclers noted that while guests laughed and drank wine, the princess remained silent. Her lips were dry, her gaze unfocused. Palace physicians watched her closely, recording tremors, cold sweats despite the cool March air, an absence of appetite, sudden episodes of breathlessness, signs we would now recognize as severe anxiety. Public splendor masked private terror. And when the final toast was raised and the civilian guests withdrew, the most dreaded moment began. Fatma was escorted from the palace halls toward the nuptial pavilion, built deep within the private gardens, according to ancestral plans dating back to the time of maimed II. The structure was octagonal, divided into 3 ascending levels. Each level served a purpose: purification, presentation, consummation. Nothing about this architecture was accidental. Every corridor, every threshold had been designed to strip the princess of agency and transform the ceremony into an act of total submission. The first level was known as Taharat Kadi, the Chamber of Purification. There, Fatma was subjected to ritual baths that lasted for hours. Carrara marble reflected torchlight across the water. Essences of damask rose, shish oil, sandalwood, Somali ambergris clung to her skin. Alchemists supplied ointments infused with diluted opium, mandrake, other substances meant to calm the body and dull resistance. Court doctors described the resulting state as an ecstasy of submission. The second level was Teslim Kadi, the floor of surrender. Here, Fatma was dressed in her nuptial gown, white silk woven with gold thread adorned with pearls from the Persian Gulf. To an outsider, it appeared regal. In truth, it was engineered for control. Hidden cords and internal fastenings restricted movement. The crown's weight limited her posture. Anklets and bracelets subtly constrained her steps. Thick-soled shoes made escape impossible. The garment was a prison disguised as splendor. While Fatma was being transformed into a symbol, her future husband underwent very different preparations. Surrounded by advisors and seasoned war veterans, Kara Mustafa Pasha received instruction, not on marriage but on domination. He was taught methods of intimidation, calculated phrases meant to humiliate, techniques to impose authority over an imperial princess. There would be no uncertainty in this union, no resistance allowed. Then came the ascent to the third level, Zifaf Kadi, the Chamber of Consummation. Its walls were covered with tapestries depicting conquered cities, defeated armies, captive princesses. The imagery was deliberate. It drew a clear parallel between victory in war and victory in the marriage bed. The furniture itself had been crafted for control. Beds with concealed cord systems, cushions soaked in soothing oils, low light designed to disorient and weaken resolve. It was there, surrounded by symbols of conquest, that Fatma faced her most feared night. Barely supported by her own breath, she became the living seal of a political pact. Official chronicles would later describe the wedding as a triumph, but inside that room, a different reality was unfolding. When the doors of the Zifaf Kadi closed behind the procession, Fatma was left alone with her husband. Medical records from the time describe what followed as a complete collapse of the spirit. Months of discipline and humiliation had exhausted her capacity to respond. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Her voice fell to a whisper. Her eyes drifted as if fixed on something no one else could see. Imperial doctors later named the condition shock-i-tam, total shock. Kara Mustafa Pasha, trained in sieges and battlefields, initially interpreted her state as defiance. He believed it was arrogance that needed to be broken. He applied the methods he had been taught: intimidation, controlled force, calculated gestures of dominance. But there was no rebellion to overcome, only emptiness. Fatma was no longer present. Her mind had retreated into deep dissociation, abandoning the body as a final means of survival. When the marriage was eventually consummated, after hours of failed attempts, Hidden observers recorded the event as traumatic for all involved. Documents written in Persian code speak of internal hemorrhages, repeated loss of consciousness, what physicians called sukut, the departure of the soul. From that night onward, Fatma Sultan was never the same. In the days that followed, even the strictest instructors in the harem were alarmed. The princess developed selective mutism. She spoke only when directly addressed and then only in whispers. Her appetite vanished entirely, forcing attendants to feed her against her will. The brilliant child who once debated scholars and studied the stars had disappeared, and what came next would ensure she never returned. Episodes of uncontrollable crying began without warning and could last for hours. Worse still, what court chroniclers referred to as the disease of fear soon emerged. The mere presence of a man, even trusted eunuchs, was enough to send the princess into panic. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. Her skin drenched in sweat. Sudden fainting spells left attendants scrambling to keep her conscious. Court physicians diagnosed what they called virginal melancholy. According to their medical treatises, this condition was common among imperial princesses after their first wedding night. It was spoken of quietly, almost clinically, as if it were an expected consequence rather than a catastrophe. In modern terms, we would recognize it for what it was: irreversible trauma, a wound to the psyche that no simple remedy could repair. They tried everything they knew: herbal treatments, music therapy, Sufi spiritual exercises meant to restore balance to the soul. None of it worked. Nothing brought back the girl Fatma had been. In her place remained a subdued, obedient presence, physically alive but absent. Her book stayed closed, her instruments gathered dust. The gardens she once wandered with wonder were abandoned. The daughter of the most powerful sultan on earth had been reduced to a silent figure, a shadow of unrealized potential. Her marriage to Kara Mustafa Pasha became mechanical. There were children. There were formal appearances. There was the outward illusion of stability, but behind closed doors, silence ruled. Distance replaced intimacy. Routine replaced connection. According to later memoirs, the Pasha himself sought escape through military campaigns and opium, attempting to silence the guilt of having played his role in a ritual that destroyed the woman he married. Fatma Sultan lived 29 more years after that night. She became an ornament at ceremonies. An obligated mother, a wife without a voice. Her death came in 1652, officially attributed to brain fever. It occurred on the anniversary of her wedding. For many within the palace, this was no coincidence. To them, it felt as though the weight of memory had finally closed in on her soul. And Fatma's fate was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. Palace archives recovered centuries later reveal that dozens of Ottoman princesses endured similar destinies. Some were marked permanently by mutism. Others attempted escape through suicide or madness. A few vanished from official records altogether, as if they had never existed. The imperial machine, so meticulous in its protocols, was equally skilled at erasing inconvenient lives. Euphemisms replaced truth. Silence replaced names. Recently translated documents speak of princesses who faked their own deaths to avoid a second marriage of others, who devised secret codes to communicate with sisters trapped in similar circumstances, and of a rare few who, with astonishing courage, petitioned the Sultan directly for divorce, defying a system that appeared unbreakable. These stories, buried for centuries in forbidden archives, reveal something crucial. Even in the deepest darkness, resistance never fully disappeared. The tragedy of Fatma Sultan, and of so many like her, exposes an uncomfortable truth. Absolute power does not always protect those closest to it. Sometimes it consumes them first. While the outside world imagined Ottoman princesses surrounded by luxury and privilege, the reality was an invisible chain, engineered with precision, enforced through ritual, justified in the name of empire. What we were taught as fairy tales were, in truth, political constructs that devoured the Sultan's own daughters. And that leaves us with a final question. How many other secrets remain hidden inside palace archives across the world? What dark rituals were concealed within European courts, Russian dynasties, Chinese imperial households? What price did women truly pay to uphold the greatness of empires? If Fatma's story has stayed with you, join us for the next revelations. Subscribe, share this story with those who deserve to know what history tried to bury. And leave a comment naming the queen or princess whose fate you want uncovered next. Because only by exposing these hidden truths can we finally hear the voices that power works so hard to silence.